Okay, so we will start the blocking part of our animation. So this is a monumental step for us as we fill our timeline with a bunch of keyframes. So naturally, we'll start off right away in Cinema. And the first thing that I'm going to do is actually just fold down this right arm node because I know that we're not going to be animating any of its attributes currently. So I'll just fold this down so we have direct access to our left arm, or you can just even move your left arm above the right arm. Just make sure that you don't drag it outside of your upper body. So I'll just make sure that our left arm still is in there. Great. Now we can hide that again. Perfect. Now, in placing keyframes in 3D, we need to make sure that we first place a keyframe on the first frame of our sequence. Because if we, for example, wanted to move ahead over here and add some motion to this left arm, if we then go back to frame 0, all of our position and rotation data for this frame has been lost because we haven't placed a keyframe there. So since I'm going to animate this left arm and, the hand and stuff first, I'll go ahead and set keyframes for all of the rotational attributes for my left arm. And you place keyframes in Cinema by hitting this little diamond square here. So if I click this, it will turn red, and I will do this for all of the rotations, just so I have them stored. I know that I'm not going to be animating the positions for my arm because I want them in the same place, so I won't keyframe them. Now, if I go ahead to, for example, frame 8, which I believe will be my first pose, and I go ahead and, for example, move out my arm like this. This is where I'm happy with the position of my arm. All of these little diamonds here will turn yellow, and that means that we haven't stored the values that we just changed. So if I, for example, were to just go ahead and scrub through my timeline right now, my arm will snap back. And that is because what I just said, we haven't stored the values there. So an easy way of avoiding this, because sometimes you might work a lot on a pose, you hop a frame forward and all of your work that you've kind of been putting in for the past few minutes is gone, which is terrible. So the easiest way of avoiding that is to activate automatic keyframing or auto keying. So if I activate this little red circle here with the A in it, our viewfinder gets this red little square around it. And that's just to kind of show you that all of the changes that you're doing currently will place a keyframe. So just so you are aware of that. And with that activated, if I were to, for example, rotate my arm out right now, which is what I want to do for my movement. So I'll rotate this arm out as if she's letting go of the sword, just like that. Now, automatically, this has placed a keyframe for all of these values that I just edited. And if I now go ahead and look at the sequence, we have actually placed our first keyframe. So that's great. And before we move any further, I'll just kind of briefly explain what type of motion I want her to be doing. So since you have probably seen the promotional material and the trailers and stuff for the course, you kind of know how our animation will look like. But I'll just kind of briefly go through how my thought process goes. So since she's standing with this like really, really big sword next to her, and she's got, her sword gripped like this, I'm kind of seeing her pick the sword up, like tugging it out of the ground and just lifting it up really proudly like this, and then swinging it down in front of her, like showing her strength, and then just swiftly just doing a really big left swing. So she just swings out, and then after that she puts down the sword again at the place where she picked it up. So therefore we have a loop. And if she's going to be able to lift the sword up and hold it like this, like you would do with the sword, you wouldn't hold the sword out like this unless maybe it's smaller or whatever. In my case, she's not going to be holding her sword out like this. So the first thing that we need to do in the sequence is actually make some kind of animation where she changes the grip of the sword. So I kind of want to animate her hand, letting go, basically just letting go of the sword, and then just traveling around the handle, gripping it, and then, doing that big motion. And since we're blocking right now, I'm just basically just going to do her letting go, traveling over the sword, gripping it, and then the pose that comes next, which is the lift up, swing, turn, put down, and then change the grip back. That's basically all the poses that I'm going to be doing for the blocking. And we have gotten one step further along that process by having her swing her shoulder out like this. So the next thing that we naturally would do would be to open the fingers up using the bend deformers that we placed previously in the course, opening the thumb up and stuff, maybe rotating the hand out a bit. So when you're thinking about what kind of poses you want to place for your characters, I like, and you will tell through this course, and I've already demonstrated it, that I act out the poses basically with my own body, because that's the best reference that you have. And you might even film yourself if you are acting it out, just so you can really study yourself in like a full body and like viewing it from a different angle. A lot of professional animators do that, and it's super handy. I won't really go too far with that in this case because we're just doing some simple movements, but that can be really handy if you want to. And so for example, if I know that I want this a bit of like an exaggerated motion where I like let go of the sword, I would just look at my hand, like would I maybe bend out the hand when I let it go, so it feels a bit more like I'm like flicking the hand out and stuff. That's the kind of stuff that I want you to really think of when you try and act these motions out. So I kind of feel like the hand should be letting go a bit. Her fingers wouldn't be like just standing out like this by default. Her fingers might be, slightly bent by the pinky and the ring finger and stuff. Or she doesn't have a ring finger, she just have a middle finger. But yeah, you kind of get it. Just try and look at, how your own body would do that kind of motion and try and mimic that in your animation. So yeah, as I mentioned, let's open up the fingers. And since we haven't placed any keyframes for the bend object, in this case, we won't be animating the rotational values. We'll be animating the bend strength of the deformer. So this will be a bit different, but this actually makes it a bit more easy for us to kind of keep track of the keyframes because we just have one value to think of. So we'll go ahead and select all of these bend objects. And of course, the first thing we want to do is store the value at frame 0. Don't make this mistake. It will hurt if you do. And I'll hop to frame 8, where our first pose is. And I'm using F and G to hop back and forth between frame in my timeline here, as you can tell. And Shift F brings us to the beginning of the sequence, and Shift G brings us to the end of the sequence. Great. Just wanted to quickly let you know that. So hop to frame 8, and we'll go ahead and select the pointy, middle, and pinky. I'll set all of them to 0 just so they open up like that. That obviously looks a bit boring, so a more natural hand motion would be maybe to have the pinky slightly bent in, so it's like a bit more relaxed. Same with the middle finger, so maybe somewhere in between like that. And then the pointy might be like even a bit bent backwards, so I'll just go ahead and set that to like the positive scale, something like that. And we'll do the same thing with the thumb. So I'll head into the thumb bend. I'll just rotate that out. Might also go into the positive side here of the strength. And for the thumb, I actually want to rotate this one. So we'll go into the coordinates of our left thumb controller here. We'll go to frame 0 and we'll keyframe all of the rotation attributes. Make sure that we have red diamonds here across the board. And I'll go to frame 8 and we'll rotate this out just a bit. So something like this. Oh, feels better. Great. Now we can just kind of look at this. Boop. Nice. That feels good. I might bend the pink out a bit more because it feels like it's slightly too bent. So something like that. Great. And you're going to tell that I'm hopping a lot back and forth between frames. And this is basically me doing the same thing that the traditional animators did when they flipped the sheet of papers back and forth, because you just want to see the difference between frames all the time. That's kind of what you're going to do throughout this entire sequence. I'm just going to hop back and forth, just trying to imagine this swinging out, and I feel like this pose is feeling all right. I'm going to animate the hand now because I kind of want to bend it out just a bit, so that kind of movement. So first off, of course, hop to the beginning, frame 0. Make sure that we store the pose of our beginning, and we'll hop to frame 8. And I'll just rotate it out. I think, yeah, it's rotation B in my case, so something like this. And I'll actually go ahead and store the values for the other rotation attributes. Even though I'm not making any edits to this, it's just good to store all of these values that we're going to animate at each pose. You'll be able to tell later on when we spline these, because if I haven't stored this and I go ahead and do some other keyframe modifications later on, the interpolation between frame 0 then and let's say frame 16 would then skip frame 8. So it would basically interpolate all the way from frame 0 to 16. And we want to avoid that. So make sure to store all of your animated values at each blocking post that we make. And with this, I think I'm kind of happy with this pose. Let's just try and deselect this and just kind of play it. Boop. Boop. Yeah, that feels good. We'll move on. And I think the next pose that we can make would basically be that. So she's let go of the sword, and now she'll want to have the hand travel kind of above the sword so she can grip it like this. She doesn't want to like go around it or anything. Like the most natural movement would just be to travel above the sword and then grip it like that. So we want to add this pose where she's basically having her hand above the bottom of the sword before she goes to grip it. So we want to add that frame. So I think we can add that at frame 11. So we can go ahead and first rotate the left arm. We'll go ahead and make sure that we have that selected. We'll rotate this forward a bit. We'll rotate it up. And you might think that we are going to do this, but if we do, you can see that our entire sleeve, which should be hanging downwards, will kind of go with that rotation since it's under the left arm now. So I'll just undo that last rotation. And the easiest for us to do is just to rotate the left arm. So I think we can rotate this RH here, and you can tell if I just rotate this, I'm basically rotating from the elbow outwards, and the sleeve kind of hanging down won't be affected by this. Since I haven't keyframed this, I'll go back to our previous pose, which is pose 8, and just make sure I keyframe all of this. So we don't need to go back all the way, just make sure that you go back to the pose that was placed previously. And I'll go to frame 11 like that, and we'll just rotate this down something like this, like that maybe. And I'll want to, obviously don't want the hand to be clipping this, so I'll just rotate this outwards a bit, like that. And I might even want to bend the elbow just a bit, like that, something like this. And then we can actually rotate this arm back a bit, something like that. Let's feel this out a bit. So let go, boop. That feels pretty good. I might even want to rotate the hand, so just kind of bend this in just a bit like this. I think that might feel really nicely. So do it like that. Good. And if we actually would do this kind of thing, would we maybe want to rotate the upper body as well? Like kind of show that she's shifting her balance just slightly. We can try that. So we can go to our upper body. No. And like previously, let's make sure that we store our rotation keyframes here, like that. And I'll hop back to frame 11, and let's see how this feels. That's the wrong axis. Let's try this, also the wrong axis. So it's rotation B, like that. And I'll keyframe these two. Let's just try and see how that feels. I reckon that's feeling pretty good, but maybe not as much. So maybe just like 1 degree. So just yeah. I reckon we can keep that. Perfect. And I'll pause this. So the next pose now that kind of makes sense would be her just snapping down to the grip. So we don't need to do any in-betweens between this. So just her going from here and then gripping the sword. And I think it would be best to just basically copy the left arm position that we had in the beginning. So it's like straight and feels very, majestic, but we just rotate the left forearm and maybe reposition the hand a bit so it fits. So I think I'll want to do this at frame 16 would feel best. We'll try that out. And if you want to, for example, like shift around poses, let's say that we want to move this to another part of the timeline. If you would, for example, just have the upper body selected here, this would be the only keyframe that you're shifting. So all of the other keyframes will still be there. So if I'm doing this, I usually like to just switch back to our move tools. We don't have this annoying circle here. I usually just like to hit Control A. So I select everything in the scene. And then I can shift things around. So then you know that you have everything selected. And since we only are placing keyframes on certain frames, we know where those keyframes are basically. So I was happy with it at 11, so I'll keep it there, but just in case you want to know how to kind of shift things around. But we'll go ahead and move on. And as I said, I want to copy the rotation values that we had in the beginning here to this frame. And I know previously in Cinema, you could just copy the keyframe straight up. I did this when I was preparing the course, and some weird stuff started happening in the timeline. It was almost as if I placed two keyframes on the same frame, and it was a nightmare. So I really want to avoid that. Hopefully, this is just a small bug in Cinema and that they fix it later. But just to play things safe, I'll just go to frame 0, and I'll just want to copy each attribute over by hand. Like that. So now we kind of have this, perfect. And naturally, if she goes down to grip her sword, it would make sense to rotate the upper body a bit downward. So she's preparing herself to like shift her weight and like pull it up. So we want to kind of communicate that with the body language. So I'll just shift her down, maybe like -2. That's a bit too much. -1. Nice, that feels better. And we'll go ahead and make sure that we have all of the rotations here stored. And after that, we'll do the forearm. So I'll go ahead and 0 these out so she can reach the sword, because otherwise I believe her arms will be a bit too short. But I obviously want her hand to be turned, and we're going to do that using the rotation H for our forearm. So I'll just kind of rotate it down, something like this. And something we can do with the hand is also just copy the values of the fingers from the beginning frame, because that's when we had it as a fist, and now we also want it to be a fist. So we'll just come to frame 0. I'll just see what I had. So -114, 100. Yeah, okay. So just make sure that we copy these. Doesn't need to be exact. I just wanted to form a fist, basically. So just copy them, frame 16, paste. Go to the beginning, then go to frame 16 and paste that in. Great, and I'll do the same thing for the thumb. So I'll just copy these rotation attributes. There is a really good way of hopping in the timeline just between keyframes. So if you have an object selected that has keyframes, you can hit Command or Control G and F to hop back and forth between keyframes. So that's what I'm doing currently. Like that, and then we'll also make sure that the bend is looking the same. Frame 16, like that. Okay, great. So even though we have this fist formed, our arm is placed just a bit too far back for us to be able to not clip the handle of the sword. So I'll just go into our left arm and we'll just rotate this out, just like this. Great. The gripping doesn't need to look perfect on the other side. The only thing that matters is what we see in the camera. So just rotate that out, and then we'll just twist the forearm just a bit like that. And do the same thing for the hand. I'll just store these, and I'll just kind of rotate this to a point where I feel like it feels natural, like that. And then I'll rotate the arm up just a bit because we want it to grip in like the middle here. So I feel like that's looking really good. So now we can go ahead and play this, see how it feels. Great. I think we can rotate the forearm a bit further because it feels like her hand is a bit too tilted. So I'll just rotate that down just a tad like this. That means I'll have to shift her left arm down a bit as well. Okay. Great. Okay. Something that I feel is really important when you are doing blocking like this is that you try and imagine some kind of like rhythm for your poses. We don't want her poses to just go uniformly or like linearly throughout the sequence. We kind of want some rhythm. So we doesn't want her poses to go We kind of want to. I'm doing some weird singing thing when I'm doing this, but it kind of helps me imagine the rhythm of her movements. So if she kind of more like, let's go, you kind of like feel her motion a bit. I hope that makes sense. But I just don't want her movements to feel like a robot's movements. I want it to feel like a human's movements, as if A human is more like, okay, I'm going to grip this and then I'm going to rip it up. And yeah. And I think we'll end there on this lesson. We did a lot of like how-tos with the keyframes, how the timeline works, some shortcuts and stuff. So we have some knowledge that we can bring into the later stages of the blocking. But yeah, we'll go ahead and move on with the rest of the sequence in the next lesson. So I'll see you over there.